Levi Hart had paid for 4 wagon loads of feed, signed for none of them, and still found one of his patched oat sacks tied behind the wrong stable at sunrise. That should have made him angry. In a town already whispering about missing orders and careless freight, it should have sent him straight to the depot with a hard accusation. Instead, he stood in the alley behind the livery, turning the sack in his hands while pale dust slid through a repaired corner, and he asked the only person nearby who looked at the stitches before she looked at his face. Ruth Bellamy, sack mender, knew that corner. She had sewn it with brown flax thread 3 weeks earlier. She also knew the patch cloth did not belong to the livery. The tag had been folded wrong, and the feed had not vanished at all. It had been traveling under a lazy mark that sent honest orders to the wrong doors. The trouble had been growing for a month before that morning. Levi ran Half Circle Ranch outside Cottonwood Wells, a dry stretch of range where hay had to be planned before heat settled in, and grain had to be ordered before every other ranch remembered winter existed. He was not a loud man. He kept clean books, paid freight early when he could, and believed a town worked best when people did not treat every error like a personal insult. But by the 4th missing feed order, even his restraint had edges. Horses needed oats. Milk cows needed bran. Work teams needed mash after long hauls. A ranch can forgive one late sack. It cannot build a season on promises that never arrive. Ruth had come to Cottonwood Wells with a hand frame, waxed thread, bent needles, and a bundle of patch cloth sorted by weave. She repaired sacks for mills, farms, freight houses, and anyone else who had learned the price of losing grain through a split seam. Her trade did not look grand from the street. She sat near loading doors, knees braced around a sack, fingers moving in small, steady pulls. But a sack mender reads the root of a town the way a banker reads a ledger. Each tear has a cause. Each patch has a place. Each knot tells whether a sack was pulled, dragged, overfilled, stored damp, or opened by someone too impatient to untie it. On the morning Levi found the oat sack, Ruth was sitting on an upturned crate behind the livery, repairing a barley bag that had lost 2 inches of seam to a rough nail. She saw Levi pause at the fence and lift the stray sack from a heap of sweepings. He did not storm. That interested her. Men who arrive ready to blame usually do not notice details. Levi noticed. He brushed the tag clean before speaking and held the sack by its good edge, not by the torn corner. He had the hands of a working rancher and the care of someone who knew a wrong touch could erase the very clue he needed. "Miss Bellamy," he said, because they had met once at the depot when she mended a corn sack for him. "Did you patch this?" Ruth set down her needle. "Turn it toward the light." He did. The patch was a square of faded blue ticking with one yellow thread running crosswise through the weave. Her stitches were not fancy, but they were distinct. 3 short bites, 1 long pull, then a locking knot laid flat so a sack could slide without catching. She had learned that pattern from a mill mender in Pueblo, and hardly anyone in Cottonwood Wells sewed it that way. "I patched it," she said, "but I patched it for your order, not for the livery." Levi's jaw worked once. "That is what I was afraid of." "Afraid of what?" "That someone has been taking my feed before it reaches the ranch." Ruth looked past him to the livery door. The stable owner, Tom Vale, was inside harnessing a team, whistling badly and keeping no secret of his morning. Sacks stood open near the grain bin, all marked with proper bills. The stray sack looked out of place, not hidden, not tucked under a tarp, not treated like anything shameful. That mattered. "If someone meant to take feed," Ruth said, This is a foolish way to do it. Levi's eyes came back to her. Many men would have heard that as a challenge. He heard it as a path. Then what way is it? I do not know yet, but this sack came through my hands, and it came through the freight house after that. If you will let me read it, I can tell where it has been touched. The livery owner stepped out just then, reins over one shoulder. If that sack is yours, Hart, take it. Came in with my bedding straw yesterday. I figured the mill reused a branded bag. Levi did not accuse him. He only asked, did the invoice say oats? Invoice said livery chop, 2 sacks short, and 1 odd. I was going to tell the depot when I went in. Ruth watched Levi absorb that. A hot answer would have been easy. He chose the slower one. Then we will go together. That choice opened the first real door in the matter. Cottonwood Wells had been primed for quarrel. The feed mill blamed the depot blamed Teamsters. Teamsters blamed ranch clerks who wrote orders in pencil. Ranches blamed one another when their stock looked better fed than their receipts. But Levi brought the livery owner, the strange sack, and a mender instead of a temper. By the time they reached the depot, half the useful facts were still intact. The freight house sat beside the spur track, a long building with sun-warped planks and a platform polished by wagon wheels. Inside were stacked sacks of oats, bran, corn chop, seed wheat, lime, coffee, and salt. Tags hung from cords. Chalk marks ran across boards. The freight clerk, Mr. Pruitt, had ink on his cuffs and a way of standing behind the counter as if the counter could settle disputes for him. Mr. Hart, he said before Levi had spoken, your order is not in. Ruth noticed Levi's fingers tighten on the sack. He could have said he had proof in his hands. Instead, he placed the sack on the counter and let the tag face up. This one is mine, Levi said. It was delivered to the livery. Pruitt lifted the tag and frowned. That says LV. It says LV on the outside fold, Ruth said. May I? The clerk looked at Levi for permission, which told Ruth he still thought the men owned the matter. Levi nodded toward her. Miss Bellamy sees what I miss. The simple sentence changed the room. Ruth had known men who would use her trade when convenient and hide her name when credit was due. Levi gave it openly. She unfolded the tag at the damp crease. Under the visible LV was older ink, faded but clear enough when turned toward the window. HCR Feed, Oats. Paid. Half Circle Ranch, Ruth said. Pruitt rubbed his forehead. Tags get reused if the blank side holds. Paper costs. Paper costs less than a missing order, Levi said, still even. The clerk flushed. I did not say it was wise. Ruth examined the cord hole. The tag had been tied through the wrong corner, which made the old writing hang outward when the sack swung on a wagon. The newer livery mark was on the inside fold. A driver glancing from the seat would see HCR or LV, depending on how the sack turned. That was not enough to explain 4 wagon loads, but it was enough to make Ruth ask for every stray feed sack delivered in the last month. Pruitt sighed, as if the request weighed more than grain. We have invoices. Invoices tell what the counter believed, Ruth said. Sacks tell where the order actually went. Levi looked at her then, and the respect in his gaze gave her a steadier voice. She had spent years working in corners of busy rooms, necessary but easy to overlook. Here, in front of the depot clerk and a rancher with a season at stake, her smallest knowledge had become the straightest road. They began at the returned pile. Ruth sorted sacks by patchcloth first. Blue ticking with yellow thread, 2 from Levi's order. Brown flower cloth with a diagonal darn, not hers. red-striped duck mended by someone at the union mill. Then she sorted by stitch pattern. Her own 3 short, 1 long pattern appeared on 6 sacks in the depot, though Pruitt had marked only 2 as belonging to Half Circle. She turned each tag without tearing it, held each one to the window, and showed how old marks bled through when paper had been dampened and dried. "This one went to the stage kitchen," she said. Pruitt checked his ledger. "It was billed to them. After it was first marked for Half Circle, see the old cord groove. It hung on a larger sack before this one." Levi leaned close but did not crowd her. "How can you tell larger?" "The crease is higher. When a tag hangs from a 50-pound oat sack, it rubs here. On a 100-pound bran sack, it rubs lower because the cord stretches differently. This tag lived on a bran sack first." Tom Vale gave a low whistle. "I have bought feed 20 years and never noticed a tag living anywhere." "Tags live short, busy lives," Ruth said. Levi smiled for the first time that morning. It was brief, but Ruth saw it and wished, inconveniently, that the room had fewer witnesses. The evidence did not point to a thief. It pointed to confusion made ordinary. Pruitt reused tags. Drivers read the biggest or darkest mark. Teamsters unloaded by habit if a sack looked like the last order for the same stop. Sacks, patched with distinctive cloth, were supposed to return to the mill, but were being sent out again before the patches were recorded. Every person had done a small, lazy thing to save time. Together, those small things had rerouted Levi's feed all over town. But one question remained. Why had Half Circle suffered more than anyone else? Ruth asked to see Levi's original order slips. Pruitt produced 3 with a defensive snap, then 1 more from a side drawer. The handwriting was clear. Half Circle Ranch, South Road, paid in advance. On each slip, Pruitt had copied a smaller loading mark in the corner, HCR. "Who else uses those letters?" Ruth asked. "Hayden Creek Road," Pruitt said. "Hale's Corn Room, hotel common ration when the hotel orders cheap." Tom laughed once, then stopped when nobody joined him. Levi rested one hand on the counter. "You mark my feed with the same letters as 3 other stops?" "Everyone knows yours goes south," Pruitt said. Ruth lifted the sack. "Drivers do not know what everyone knows. They know what the tag says when dust is blowing and the wagon is late." That was the second door. The clerk's face changed from annoyance to worry, and worry, if handled gently, can become honesty. Levi seemed to understand that. He did not press hard. He asked Pruitt to walk through one order from arrival to delivery. The clerk explained the process with more detail than pride, and each detail revealed another place where assumption had been mistaken for method. Feed arrived by rail in mill sacks. Pruitt chalked the local mark on the stack. If tags from the mill had blank backs, he reused them for outgoing deliveries. Teamsters loaded by chalk mark. If a tag turned and an old mark showed, they sometimes trusted the old mark over the chalk because chalk rubbed off. If a customer complained, Pruitt checked invoices, not sack bodies. Therefore, the paper trail looked tidy while the actual feed drifted. Ruth asked for the Teamster list. Pruitt hesitated. Levi said, "We're not here to ruin a man for following a bad habit." Those words settled the clerk. He handed over the list. By afternoon, Ruth, Levi, Tom, and Pruitt had visited the stage kitchen, the hotel store, and Hale's corn room. At each stop, Ruth found at least 1 sack with her stitches or Levi's patchcloth. Nobody had hidden them. Nobody had known. The stage cook had wondered why oats arrived finer than usual. The hotel had fed bran to its carriage team because the tag said ration. Hale had stacked 2 sacks in a corner, unopened, waiting for someone to claim them because the contents did not match his order. Each mini payoff narrowed the mystery and widened the lesson. Levi reclaimed what he could without making a scene. If feed had already been used in good faith, he wrote it down and accepted that money could be adjusted later. Ruth noticed that too. A man who wants only to win will make every discovery a public blow. Levi wanted the route repaired more than he wanted a person to look small. At Hale's storehouse, Ruth found the strangest sack yet. It was Levi's, beyond doubt. Blue patch, her stitches, half-circle chalk under a smear. But the freight tag did not say livery, hotel, stage, or Hale. It said Carter Wash, a ranch 5 miles east that had not ordered feed all month. "Why would mine go there?" Levi asked. Ruth turned the sack and saw a torn strip of green cloth caught under the cord. "Because this tag was tied over another patch." "A patch can change a delivery?" "If the driver reads color faster than ink, yes." She explained that teamsters often learned customer sacks by sight. The Carter Wash Ranch used green-striped sack patches from a flour supplier in Mesa Verde. A driver in a hurry, seeing green cloth under a tag and a chalk mark smudged by rain, could toss the sack toward Carter Wash without reading the full order. That sounded foolish, only until everyone remembered how many loads were handled at dusk, in dust, after long roads and short tempers. Pruitt looked miserable. "I should have made fresh tags." "Yes," Ruth said. Levi glanced at her, surprised by the plainness. She continued, "And the mill should not send reused sacks without a patch record. And drivers should not unload by color. And ranches should return empties with full names tied to the mouth, not scratched on the side. The fault is spread out. That is why it kept walking." Levi's mouth softened at that. "Fault with legs." "Long legs," she said. "It has been covering miles." By sunset, they had located nearly half his latest order. The rest had gone into bins and feed troughs, impossible to sort without causing more trouble than justice required. Yet the pattern was now clear enough to change the system. Pruitt agreed to stop reusing tags for paid feed. Tom offered to bring back odd sacks from every stable delivery. Hale agreed to keep a claim shelf near the depot door. Levi asked Ruth what should happen next. That question caught her more than any compliment could have. Men had asked her to sew, patch, hurry, lower her price, or hold a sack while they talked over her. Few had asked her to decide the next step after the proof was found. "We need one full test," she said. "A new order, fresh tags, marked sacks, and a delivery route watched from depot to ranch." Pruitt looked at the darkening sky. "Tonight?" "Tomorrow morning," Ruth said. "Tonight, I mend and mark." Levi did not like leaving his feed short one more night, but he saw the wisdom. "Then I will bring supper to the depot if Miss Bellamy is willing to work late." Ruth almost refused out of habit. Accepting help from customers could blur lines, and she had kept her independence by guarding those lines carefully. But Levi was not offering a favor with a hook in it. He was offering food to someone whose labor served his ranch and the town. She nodded. "Coffee, too," she said. "Good coffee or depot coffee?" "If there is a difference, surprise me." His smile stayed a little longer this time. That evening became the quiet heart of the whole matter. The depot lamps were lit. Pruitt wrote fresh tags under Ruth's instruction, full names, full roads, black ink on clean paper, no folded backs. Tom hauled stray sacks to the platform. Levi brought a covered plate from the hotel, 2 cups of coffee, and a small jar of peaches because he said long work needed something bright at the end. Ruth mended by lamplight, reinforcing corners and sewing a narrow white tab near the mouth of every half-circle sack. Not a decorative mark, a practical one that could be seen even when dust covered chalk. Levi sat across from her at a respectful distance and copied sack numbers into a ledger. He was slower with the pen than with a rope, but careful. Ruth liked careful. Careful left fewer things for women like her to repair. "How did you learn to read sacks this way?" he asked after a while. "By being told sacks were simple." He looked up. "That taught you?" "It made me stubborn enough to look closer. My first employer said a torn sack was only cloth with a problem. He was wrong. It is a record with a problem. If you fix only the cloth, the same road tears it again." Levi considered that. "Ranches are the same." "Are they?" "A fence breaks where pressure gathers. A wagon rut deepens where everyone takes the same lazy turn. A ledger goes wrong where a man writes what he expects instead of what he sees." Ruth tied a knot and cut the thread. "That sounds like you have spent time correcting yourself." "More than I enjoyed." "That is usually where the useful lessons are." They worked until the town lamps had gone dark beyond the depot windows. Conversation came in small pieces: where she had traveled, why he planted extra alfalfa even in dry years, which mills treated sacks decently, why Cottonwood Wells had too many shorthand marks for places that sounded alike. Each exchange opened a little more trust without either of them naming it. Ruth learned that Levi's restraint was not coldness, it was effort. He had a quick mind and strong feelings, but he chose where to set them down. Levi learned that Ruth's sharp eye did not come from suspicion. It came from care, sharpened by repetition. Before she left, he walked her to the boarding house porch with the ledger under one arm and her mending frame in his other hand. He did not take the frame from her. He asked to carry it, and that difference mattered. "Tomorrow may still make me look foolish," he said. "Only if you ignore what it shows." "And if it shows I have been wrong about someone?" "Then you say so cleanly." He nodded. "I can do that." Ruth believed him. Morning brought wind, dust, and a depot platform full of witnesses pretending not to be witnesses. Pruitt tied fresh tags with full names turned outward. Ruth checked each knot. Levi watched the teamster load the wagon in order, calling sack numbers while Pruitt marked them. Tom and Hale stood nearby because some of the misrouted feed had passed through their places, and they wanted the matter settled before gossip turned it sour again. The first problem came before the wagon moved. The teamster reached for a chalk nub and marked the top sack HCR out of habit. Ruth caught his wrist, not roughly, just firmly enough to stop the motion. "Full name." He blinked. "Everyone knows half circle," Levi said. "Write the full name." The teamster did. Half Circle Ranch, South Road. It took 4 extra breaths. The second problem came at the first fork beyond town. The teamster turned east. "South Road," Levi called. The driver reined in, embarrassed. "I was thinking Carter Wash." "Because of the white tab?" Ruth asked. "Because Hart's sacks used to have whatever patch was on them. I saw the load and my hands took the old turn." That moment proved the deepest part of the trouble. Labels mattered, but habit had been steering before the eye had finished reading. Ruth wrote it down. Levi did not scold. He asked the driver to start again from the fork, read the tag out loud, and take the correct road. It might have felt small if handled badly. Ruth handled it like a test of equipment. The man read, turned south, and kept going. The third problem waited at Half Circle itself. Levi's foreman had built feed bins along the east wall of the storehouse, each labeled by contents. The delivery wagon stopped at the yard gate. The driver began unloading oats into the bran area because the old bin paint had faded, and the strongest word visible was ran from bran. From a distance, it could look like ranch. Ruth covered her mouth. not to hide laughter, but to hold back the kind of weary amazement that comes when one lazy habit introduces you to its cousins. Levi saw it too. "Paint," he said. "And placement," Ruth added. "The feed tags should match bin tags. Same words, same order. No shorthand." "You are redesigning my storehouse now." "Only the part that keeps eating your orders." He smiled. "Fair." The test delivery succeeded after that. Every sack arrived, every number matched, every bin received what the order intended. It should have ended the mystery, but Ruth was still uneasy. The pattern explained the latest loss, yet not the first order that began the trouble. That one, according to Levi, had never appeared anywhere. No hotel, no livery, no stage kitchen, no Carter wash. A missing first order could become a loose thread that unraveled trust later if left alone. She asked Levi to take her to his empty sack room. There on a shelf he kept returned sacks folded by date. Ruth examined the pile and found something odd. Several sacks from before the missing orders had been folded with the mouth inward, hiding the return tags. That was common enough, but one sack had been folded twice around a tag still tied to the cord. The tag was brittle, rubbed nearly blank, and marked with an old mill stamp from Arroyo Feed. "This was from the first order?" she asked. Levi checked the date written on the sack body. "Yes." "It came back empty?" "After a neighbor borrowed sacks for seed and returned a mixed pile. I did not think to check." Ruth unfolded the tag carefully. Under the dirt, in faint ink, was not half circle at all. It was H. Carter, South Road, old account. The mill had used a tag from a closed account for a Carter family that once lived near Levi's Road. Pruitt, seeing South Road, had copied HCR from habit and sent the sacks toward the livery because the driver associated Carter with Carter Wash. From there, empties returned in a neighbor's seed pile, and Levi had unknowingly shelved proof that his first order had completed a circle without ever feeding his stock. The room went quiet. "So the first order did arrive," Levi said slowly. "Just not as feed I recognized." "It arrived as confusion," Ruth said. He took off his hat and set it on the shelf. "I nearly blamed Pruitt for taking payment on goods he never handled." "You did not." "I thought it." "Thoughts are allowed to pass through before you choose which ones to keep." He looked at her then with an openness that felt more intimate than any touch. "You give a man room to be better than his first reaction." Ruth folded the sack again, this time with the tag visible. "You gave me room to prove it." That afternoon, Levi rode back to town with Ruth on the wagon seat beside him and the evidence stacked behind them. At the depot, he did exactly what she had told him the night before. He said cleanly where he had been wrong. Not loudly, not theatrically, but in front of the people who had heard the rumors. He told Pruitt the depot habits had to change, but he also said the clerk had not taken his money dishonestly. He told Tom the livery owed him for one unused sack, but not for feed already used in good faith. He told the teamster the route error was now recorded, not held over his head. Then he asked Ruth to explain the new sack system because it was hers. She stood on the platform with wind pulling at her skirt and laid out rules simple enough to last. Fresh tags for paid feed, full names, full roads, patch records kept by Mender, mill, and depot. White tabs only for half circle until other ranches chose their marks. Return sacks folded with tags outward. No delivery made from chalk alone. Each rule was small. Together they made a net strong enough to catch error before it traveled. Pruitt agreed, partly from embarrassment and partly from relief. He was not a villain. He was a tired clerk who had allowed shortcuts to become policy. That did not excuse the mess, but it meant the town could repair him along with the process. Ruth preferred repair when repair could hold. By the end of the week, feed moved differently through Cottonwood Wells. Not perfectly, but visibly better. The depot platform had a claim shelf. The livery door had a board for odd sacks. The hotel returned empties with full tags. Pruitt ordered new paper and complained about its cost less often after Levi paid for the first bundle as part of his own corrected system. Ruth charged the depot for patch records, and for the first time in town, her trade was listed on the freight wall beside hauling, weighing, and storage. The mill owner arrived 3 days later, and that was when the town learned whether the new system could survive someone with a larger ledger. Mr. Ainsley from Union Mill came in a dust-gray coat, carrying invoices wrapped in oilcloth and a face arranged for complaint. He had heard that Cottonwood Wells was blaming his sacks for misdirected feed. Pruitt looked ready to defend the depot. Tom Vale looked ready to defend the livery. Levi arrived last with Ruth, and because he did not stride in like a man seeking a fight, the others quieted before the first sharp word took root. "We are not here to lay all the fault at the mill," Levi said. "We are here because your sacks carry marks after they leave you, and our depot adds marks before the old ones are quiet." Mr. Ainsley looked at Ruth. "And you are?" "The person who can show you which marks are traveling farther than your invoices." He might have dismissed her if Levi had not stood beside her with the calm certainty of a customer who expected her to be heard. Ruth spread 5 sacks across the depot platform. She did not begin with accusation. She began with cloth. One had blue ticking from her own patch roll. One had a green-striped mesa cloth. One had red duck from the Union Mill's repair table. One had a flower patch from Hale's store. One had no patch, but carried 2 cord grooves. Then she laid the tags above them in the order they had likely traveled. Old ink under new. Crease over crease. Cord hole beside cord hole. Mr. Ainsley started with folded arms. By the 3rd sack, his hands had fallen to his sides. "That red duck is ours," he said. "Yes," Ruth answered. "And the thread is yours too. You use a 2-pull lock with a high knot. My mender does. Your mender is good. The patch holds. But your shipping room does not record patch cloth, so when sacks return mixed, no one can tell whether a red patch means Union Mill grain, a repaired empty, or another customer's order using your old cloth." Mr. Ainsley frowned at the platform. "We mark the invoice. Invoices ride in pockets. Sacks ride on wagons." That sentence did more work than a scolding would have. The mill owner asked to see the rest. Ruth showed him how a tag reused from bran could hang lower on a note sack, how a faded mill stamp could overpower fresh pencil, how a mender's patch might become a teamster's shortcut if repeated often enough. She also showed him where the depot had made errors, where ranches had returned sacks folded poorly, and where drivers had relied on color instead of words. No one escaped the pattern, which made it easier for each man to accept his part. Mr. Ainsley finally turned to Levi. "You could have demanded replacement for every missing sack. Some feed was used by people who received it honestly. Some was delayed by the depot. Some confusion started at the mill. I want future orders to arrive more than I want a perfect argument about past ones." Ruth felt her chest tighten at that. A perfect argument about past ones. She had known people who spent more strength proving injury than repairing the road ahead. Levi was not yielding fairness. He was choosing a repair that could keep feeding his ranch after the meeting ended. The mill owner agreed to stamp outgoing tags with full destination names and a large return line. He also agreed to send patch records with every mixed lot, using colored cards that matched the repair cloth. Ruth designed the card layout on the spot, plain enough for a tired shipping hand to follow. Pruitt agreed to file the cards beside local delivery records. Tom offered the livery board as a public place where unmatched sacks could hang for claim. The system grew from the depot fix into a route agreement. After the meeting, Ruth stood alone on the platform for a moment, rolling thread back onto a spool. Levi came to her side, but left enough silence for her thoughts to finish. "You did not make me prove I belonged in that meeting," she said. "You had the proof in your hands. That does not always matter to men with ledgers." "It should." "Should is a thin bridge." "Then we build a better one." She looked at him, surprised by the plainness. He was not promising to change the world by morning. He was promising to stand where the next board needed nailing. That was more believable, and therefore more moving. The first route agreement was tested the following Monday. Union Mill sent a mixed load: oats for Half Circle, bran for the hotel, corn chop for the livery, and seed sacks for Hale. Each lot carried a full tag, a patch record card, and a return line. Pruitt groaned at the extra paper until the unloading took less time than usual because nobody had to guess. The teamster grumbled at reading aloud until he realized he made no wrong turns. Ruth checked every patch against the card and found one mismatch: a green strip on a sack listed as Red Duck. The mill had packed one old sack into the wrong lot. Because the error was caught on the platform, it traveled no farther than the claim shelf. Levy watched that stray sack hang on its hook. "That would have been mine last month." "Or the hotel's," Ruth said. "Or Carter Wash." "Carter Wash may never forgive us for how often they received your oats." "I will send them a proper invoice apology." "A what?" "A plain apology with numbers." "That may be the most half-circle thing you have said." He took off his hat, pretending solemnity. "We are a plain apology with numbers kind of ranch." Ruth laughed then, not loudly, but enough that Pruitt looked over from the counter and smiled into his ledger. By week's end, Ruth had one more quiet proof that the repair would hold. A farmer from the North Flats brought in 2 sacks he swore were not his, both tied with old cord and marked only by a smudge. Before the new system, those sacks would have gone into a corner until someone forgot them. This time, Pruitt checked the patch card, Tom checked the claim board, and the teamster read the return line. The sacks belonged to a small dairy west of town whose name had once been shortened to initials. They were sent home before sundown. No crowd gathered, no argument formed. The town simply used the method and moved on. Ruth found that more satisfying than any public thanks, because a repair has truly taken root when people stop marveling at it and start depending on it. Levi saw her watching the ordinary success and did not interrupt. Later, he said the best systems should be a little boring once they work, and Ruth decided that was the kind of wisdom a freight town could live on. Levi's ranch recovered its rhythm. Oats filled the right bin, bran stayed dry. The work teams ate on schedule. Yet, he still came into town more often than feed required. He brought empty sacks before they tore. He asked Ruth whether a patch should be square or long depending on load strain. He carried coffee once, then peaches again, then a small spool of linen thread he had found at the mercantile because she had mentioned hers was nearly gone. Ruth noticed each gesture and examined her own caution with the same honesty she gave a sack seam. She had built a life that moved because moving kept her independent. A shop meant rent, customers, promises, and people knowing when she came home tired. It also meant a proper workbench, a dry place for patch cloth, and perhaps a man who understood that love should not be another form of ownership. One evening, after the depot closed and the sky turned copper over the tracks, Levi found her sorting tags by lamplight. "Pruitt says you are considering the empty tack room as a shop," he said. "Pruitt talks too much." "He does, but sometimes near the truth." She held up a tag. "If I stay, it will be because the work can support itself." "I know. Not because your ranch has feed trouble." "I hope my ranch never has this particular trouble again." "Then your argument for me staying is weak." He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, careful not to enter her workspace without invitation. "My argument is that Cottonwood Wells has more sacks than sense, and you understand both. My hope is separate." Ruth set the tag down. "And what is your hope?" "That I might court you without interrupting your work or asking you to trade your name for mine before either of us knows what a shared life would require." The lamp hissed softly. Outside, a wagon rolled past with properly tied tags fluttering at the load. Ruth had heard proposals made like bargains, compliments made like claims, and sweet words used to hurry decisions that deserved time. Levi's words did none of that. They made a place where her answer could be honest. "You may call on me Sunday after supper," she said. "Bring no feed questions." "What may I bring?" "Yourself. And if you must bring something, bring that spool of linen thread from Miller's. The good one, not the shiny, weak one." "I can tell the difference now." "We will see." Sunday became the first of many evenings when work ended before conversation did. They walked by the spur track, then the dry creek, then the south road where the first wrong turn had been corrected. Their courtship did not erase the practical world around them. It grew through it. Levi learned to mend simple corner tears, badly at first, then well enough that Ruth trusted him with ranch sacks. Ruth learned the half-circle bins and suggested changes that saved him steps each morning. He listened. She laughed more. He spoke more. Neither of them became less themselves. The final proof of the new system came 2 months later, when the largest feed order of the season arrived in Cottonwood Wells during a dust storm, the sort of day that had once made shortcuts feel reasonable. Pruitt tied fresh tags under a covered lamp. The teamster read each full name aloud. Ruth checked patch tabs by touch because dust coated everything. Levi waited at the ranch with bins newly painted in clear black letters. Every sack arrived where it belonged. Not one went to the livery, the hotel, Hale's corn room, or Carter Wash. Ruth rode out the next morning to inspect the empty sacks before they returned to town. She expected a few careless folds, perhaps one missing tag. Instead, she found Levi's foreman had built a narrow return rack near the storehouse door, with full-name labels above each slot and a small covered box for patch cards. Levi stood nearby with a hammer still in his hand, watching her read the arrangement. "Too much?" he asked. "No," Ruth said. "It tells tired hands what to do before they guess." "That sounded like something you would approve." "It does." He looked relieved in a way that touched her. Not because he needed praise for a rack, but because he had tried to make her method welcome where his own habits had once failed. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood and saw, more clearly than before, that trust was no longer a rescue between them. It had become routine. That evening, Levi brought the last empty wagon back to town and found Ruth closing her shop. A new sign hung above the tack room door. Ruth Bellamy, sack mending and freight marks. The letters were plain, dark, and easy to read from the platform. She had chosen that on purpose. "The order held," he said. "I heard. Pruitt says your system saved him half a day's argument." "That might be worth more than your feed." "To Pruitt, yes." They stood beneath the sign while the depot settled around them. Levi reached into his coat and withdrew the first blue ticking patch she had sewn for his order, washed clean and framed between two small pieces of thin wood. Ruth stared at it, then at him. "You framed a sack patch." It was the first thing that told the truth when everyone else was guessing. "Including you?" "Especially me." There was no grand speech after that. He did not need one. Ruth took the little frame and felt the odd tenderness of being seen through the exact thing others had overlooked. Her trade, her stitches, her patient evidence. "Levi Hart," she said, "you are a careful man." "I am trying to be." "That is better than claiming it already." He offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked toward the boarding house under a clear evening sky, past the depot where fresh tags hung straight, past the livery where odd sacks waited on the claim board, past the fork in the road where habit had once turned the wrong way. The town had not become perfect. Paper still tore, chalk still rubbed off. People still reached for shortcuts when tired. But now there was a mender's mark in the system, a rancher's patience beside it, and a trust restored because two people had followed small evidence until it led them home.